As everyone who has ever met me knows, Higurashi is my favourite series. With the final instalment of its original sound novel finally out on Steam as of last month, it's my hope that more people are going to be picking it up. If that's the choice you're here to deliberate, I have a spoiler-free video to answer all your questions, and you should click away now. But for those of you who have come to the end of this wonderful work, join me as I reflect on how it has impacted me. I first became aware of Higurashi shortly after the anime aired in my preteen years. I had recently become enamoured with the medium and was burning through every series I could find. Anime was, for me, escapism in its purest form. I was utterly enthralled by the seemingly limitless worlds on offer. The opportunity to come home from my inner London school each afternoon and travel to the Japanese countryside of 1983 seemed as exciting as anything else. I never realised, as I watched that infamous opening scene play out for the very first time, that I'd still be talking about it over a decade later, and that the course of my life had, in that moment, shifted forever. Friendship has always been a tricky topic for me. I've always had friends, though. Friends with whom I'd walk home at the end of a school day as a child. We'd fill a paper bag with one-piece sweets and amble through the alleys and estates, enjoying our very first taste of freedom. My family situation, on the other hand, was complicated, and any relationships outside of it were to remain firmly beyond the bounds of my front door. Come the precipice of the summer break that bridged that stage of my life and the next, the misplaced melancholy I had no words to explain was surely the knowledge I would never see most of these people again, despite truly caring for them. I had friends in secondary school. Mine was an hour from home, and said friendships were conducted in large part on the 4 buses the same small group of us used to get there and back each day. It was the same routine. We'd make regular pit stops at corner shops and takeaway places, then sprawl ourselves and our backpacks across the back seats. Always the back seats. As the years passed and the seasons cycled by, we would talk about everything, and yet somehow nothing that truly mattered, a careful exercise in distance masquerading as something else. I loved these friends, but clearly I didn't trust them. And I had friends when I was uprooted from this life. Kids like myself who'd been moved around the world at the whims of their parents, with whom I'd explore the foreign town I found myself in as we spoke about what it meant to lose your home. Most of the time, though, I'd turn down the invitations, finding days spent in bed more appealing. Only when these people were gone, on to the next city or country, would I wish I'd taken the chance while it was still there. I remember all of these people, and I'm brimming with regrets for how the girl who hardly knew herself pushed so many people away without ever realizing. My experiences aren't unique. Humans are experts at self-imposed isolation, the world over. In shows and books made for children, we often see idealistic depictions of friendship that only remind us they are written by adults. Contrary to the idea that children are born with some inbuilt capacity for connection, Higurashi demonstrates to us how they too need to learn companionship, and what happens when they grow into adults who never did. More than anything, Higurashi implores us to make this effort, reminding that it is never too late. When Higurashi begins, we jump straight into getting to know the club. Simply put, they act like real kids and teens, jumping from awkward flirtation to chaotic playfighting. Their interactions hold an air of authenticity, perfectly melding their wit and wisdom with their bright-eyed youth. It's a little less refined an introduction than some might choose for their cast, but that's what gives it its charm. We're seeing these characters for who they really are. Right? None embody this theme greater than our lead, Keiichi. The sheer enthusiasm with which he jumps into everything is only recontextualized when we later learn of his troubled and lonely past. He is driven by an almost desperate urge to diminish the cavern between himself and his peers. He has an absolute need to feel a sense of belonging, and he is overjoyed to have seemingly found it for the very first time. It is important that we watch Keiichi wake up, get ready for school, walk there, mess around with friends before class starts, share his lunch, and make plans on the way home. In every meticulous detail of this routine, we are able to remember the mundanities of our own childhoods, the common threads that stitch together the memories that prevail. Contrasted with his confident exterior, we see Keiichi navigate these newly formed relationships with great trepidation. There's an endearing nervousness that underlies his interactions with his friends, each moment of connection hard-won. And yet, what Keiichi is about to learn is just how fragile these relationships really are. One of the reasons Onikakushi is so tragic is this: Keiichi is defenseless. He has been given a mere number of weeks to build the safety net that he needs to find his way out of the paranoia that ensnares him so completely. It's an impossible task. Those of us experiencing the arc for the first time have no reason to believe Rena and Mion aren't truly trying to kill him. We understand perfectly both the desperation of his want to believe in them and his ultimate inability to do so. We feel his pain as he experiences the joys of friendship for the first time, only for it to have come to this. Not even his life being on the line, but betrayal. The thought that they never cared for him in the first place. The inability to distinguish between real bonds and the act he begins to consider they might have been putting on all along. How can Keiichi regain his trust in his friends when he never had it to lose? The second Keiichi sets out to find his own answers as to what occurred in Hinamizawa's past, the wheels of tragedy are already turning. A journey for answers turns into a web of acquaintances formed for all the wrong reasons, a community of people with their own hidden intentions. And then Keiichi finds himself in a police car outside the school gates, and someone's dead, and he's being told to keep secrets, and he's being told to mistrust, and the most important thing of all is easy to miss. He's being told not to talk to his friends. There's something poetic in how he later tries to respond to Rena in kind, making up some story about what he was doing when he vanished from the classroom. A lie for a lie. And just like that, everything begins to come tumbling down. It's easy to discard a friendship in practice, and Keiichi is to the point. Once he's convinced he's in danger, he wastes no time isolating himself. It's painfully blunt, the way he physically keeps Rena and Mion at a distance each time they try now to communicate. He will not let them get through to him. He has already decided how this story will end. In actuality, it's not that simple. Right through to the end, he laments the course of action he sees as being his only option. He struggles to discard his feelings, and his inability to do so only fuels his frustration. He believes his love makes him weak, but believing that doesn't make it go away. He's dealing with this realization up to the moments before he dashes from his blood-splattered room, where, whilst standing over Rena and Mion's corpses, he is confounded by the dichotomy, believing his supposed friends were trying to kill him, being driven to the point of killing them first, and still, with every swing of the bat, only seeming to reaffirm the love that he cannot take apart the way he did the relationships they'd built. It's only when it's too late that Keiichi realizes for the first time that perhaps he has no idea what friendship is after all. Onikakushi is about the breakdown of a relationship and the grief that follows. Despite its dramatics, at its core it's a struggle we're all familiar with in some form, indeed one that defines childhood and adolescence, and that is how it cuts so deeply. Higurashi's horror is firmly rooted in the everyday. The story is very deliberately set in an era preceding widespread access to the internet and smartphones. Hinamizawa is itself cut off from the outside world in more ways than one, not only nestled amongst the mountains, but gripped by aged traditions any outsider would struggle to understand. One of the series' most iconic scenes comes at the end of the first arc. The setting, a phone booth that can be found on a dark street on the very outskirts of the village. Blood drips down the walls, housing a body slumped next to a receiver still dangling off the hook. It is the emblem of the miscommunication that always precipitates Higurashi's tragedy. Years before this ever happens, Rika will cut the cables connecting the phone to the outside world in failed attempt after failed attempt to get through to Akasaka. Later, it is the place Rena will submit completely to her delusions. Again and again, the characters are disempowered by their inability to connect. It isn't all doom and gloom, though. The media we consume is flooded by depictions of first love because of this very same lack of communication. The poring over every word for some hidden meaning. The spring in your step when you're sure you found it. The shy glances, the lingering touches, the slowly edging forwards. Sweet torture. In Watanagashi, Mion, lacking confidence in her ability to communicate her feelings directly, takes on a persona. For Keiichi's part, he notes the shared secret is enjoyable for him. It's something for the two of them alone, a strange display of intimacy. In this way they proceed, neither individual willing to bridge the gap and have an honest conversation. Once again, misunderstanding breeds within this environment, far more innocuous, no less lethal. Mion suggests this. If Shion is what Keiichi wants her to be, then Shion is who she'll become. It's some of the more subtly heartbreaking writing in the series. In Onikakushi, Keiichi's love for Mion and Rena is ultimately conditional because it collapses the second Oishi suggests they haven't told him everything about themselves. Here, Mion thinks love is reliant on the dilution and doctoring of one's true self. So much of Mion and Shion's arcs are about their need to be recognized as unique individuals, a begging for Keiichi to see through the facade. Higurashi loves, after all, to destroy the lens of romanticism through which we portray relationships. We often talk about classic Disney movies and how they create unrealistic expectations of what romance looks like. They aren't the only culprits, though. Shion, for example, tells Keiichi the jealousy he feels for her and Mion's relationship is misplaced. Twins are often likewise the victims of such fantasy. She reminds him that siblings have to build a relationship with one another like anybody else, rather than relying on some ineffable connection. Perhaps more memorable than the bitter fights, the moments throughout the series where we see the twins sit in awkward silence remind us of this fact. Keiichi is perfect as our protagonist because he is, for all intents and purposes, a stereotypical teenage boy. When we meet him, he refuses to talk about his emotions or show vulnerability, seeks to solve his problems through aggression and violence, and struggles to recognize his friends' individual complexities by virtue of their shared sex. A large part of the question arcs is dedicated to this last realization in particular, as Keiichi explores relationships platonic, romantic, and familial in nature with each of his co-cast, and learns how much more there is to each of them than appearances suggest. He is beginning to understand that happiness lies not in an idealistic vision of what a relationship could or should be, but what it simply is when you accept the person in front of you for who they are. Nothing more, nothing less. He knows he will never truly be Satoko's brother, for example, but that doesn't make their bond any less powerful. While Keiichi initially struggles to trust and thus form genuine relationships, Rena doesn't believe it's worthwhile to. The two make for a pair of incredibly compelling foils. Starting with her mother's betrayal of their family, and concluding with the club's inability to save Satoshi, Rena has been taught that relying on others means being let down and hurt, as a rule. She seems more firmly convinced than anyone that friendship is a farce. This is, of course, shocking for us to discover after seeing the genuine love she has for her friends over the course of the prior arcs. Rena's arc shocked me to my core. I immediately identified with the isolation necessitated by having a complicated family situation you can't openly discuss, and the care she provided for her friends, yet refused to have reciprocated. The scene at the junkyard, where nearly 3/4 of the way through the series, we finally see the club have their first honest conversation, is perfect catharsis. At last, they give voice to what lies in the very depths of their hearts, allowing themselves to both hurt and be hurt in the process. We will likely all have been faced with a situation where a similarly serious discussion was needed if a friendship were to be mended. The alternative is often not the kind of messy breakup we all try to avoid, but rather the sadder, lonelier state of aversion, wherein two people claim to care for each other, yet only do so from a comfortable distance. Tsumi Horoboshi is nothing short of revelatory. After 5 arcs of watching the club and vicariously enjoying their supposed friendship, it comes like a freezing cold shower. Was what we were seeing until now really worthy of being called that? Anime, manga, and visual novels are inundated with stories that paint relying on your friends as the solution to every problem. We enjoy them because they are a fantasy. Think about the last time you were really suffering. How many people did you talk to about it? How many people were you willing to burden with your problems, trusting that their love wasn't conditional? This is the uncomfortable wake-up call Higurashi unceremoniously drops on our doorstep. True friendship was never meant to be easy. As Rena suffers through the aftermath of her double murder and her resulting psychotic relapse, Keiichi desperately wants to find a way to make everything better. Does he push her to talk to him, or wait until she's ready? Does he try to make her laugh, or would that be insensitive? Does he spend time with her, or leave her be? There aren't stock answers to these questions. He will inevitably make mistakes, hurt her and be hurt himself, in the weeks, months and years that make up her recovery process. That's the commitment you make when you call someone your friend. In the first arc of the series, we watch Keiichi succumb to blind fear and panic in the face of the distorted facts Oishi feeds him about his friends. He wishes above all else to go back to the time when he'd lived in blissful ignorance of everything. In Tsumi Horoboshi, we watch him stand face to face with Rena, whose hands are literally stained with blood, and tell her he accepts her as she is. The events of Tsumi Horoboshi transpire as they do because Keiichi makes the right decisions again and again. Trusting, believing, reaching out, these aren't one-time actions, but continual affirmations that breed further transparency. Higurashi isn't just about friendship, though. The last few arcs in particular really lean into the idea of all humans being connected. Japan is a collectivist country. In this sense, Higurashi's core concept is not particularly surprising. The idea is that you are but one gear in a huge machine, and that the movement of a gear even 100 gears apart from you will eventually influence you too. And it is normal in Japanese society to consider your fellow person in all you do, whether that's wearing a face mask when sick or not speaking on the phone on public transport. Simultaneously, it is a culture dominated by the very distance Higurashi decries, where mental health service usage is notably lower than other developed countries, and hierarchies dictated by status and age govern how people communicate with one another. Higurashi directly challenges this status quo in ways that may seem innocuous to a Western audience, yet are actually fairly radical. The story frequently cites children as the ones adults must learn from, and as those who will usher in the new, better age for the country, a statement bordering on taboo in a country where respect for your elders is paramount. A huge portion of Higurashi's final quarter is taken up by children directly challenging and attempting to overturn the adults' way of doing things. Beyond communities dictated by birthplace, blood ties, or friendship, in Akasaka and Rika, we see two characters who come from two different worlds, ships passing in the night. Their story demonstrates beautifully the potential these happenstance meetings hold. There is something incredibly raw and human in their immediate connection, an almost father-daughter relationship. The small ways in which a stranger can be exactly what you need at the most unexpected of times. For 100 years, Rika remembers their fleeting relationship, without daring to hope that he will one day return for her. Paradoxically, Akasaka cannot be granted the miracle of a second chance to save her until he believes in it himself. In the years beyond 1983, he lives in regret, training his body and mind to become the person he should have been, all too late. Akasaka is the embodiment of the hope Higurashi so loves, and in him we see that your efforts can be rewarded. Higurashi's miracles, like its fate, are man-made. Putting in hard work to create a miracle seems like an oxymoron, but this is how the series translates these concepts into tangible lessons. More comprehensibly, we see this in Irie, who continues to become a better doctor beyond his parents' passing. In the moment where he is able to tell Shion she will one day be reunited with Satoshi, he realizes what he had been working for all this time. Because these two characters believe without any promise their wishes will be realized, because they allow themselves to feel their grief instead of closing themselves off, because they continue to care, they succeed. Rika has likewise failed for so long, in part because she acted alone, forgetting every player on the game board was another living person with their own thoughts, feelings, and intentions. In the connecting fragments segment of Matsubayashi, we are put in the heads of each and every character. Before this, we are made to understand even Takano's pain so vividly that the concept of protagonists and antagonists completely fades. Finally, the audience is addressed directly, and asked whether they have the courage to hope along with Rika and her friends for the ending they desire, and risk hurting for them. They are reliant on you, after all, to keep reading if their story is to be realized. In a story that dares to try and demonstrate to its reader some of the most important lessons life holds, what does it say that Ryukishi 07 speaks to us through the voices of children? In a few melancholic, slow scenes around Matsubayashi's midpoint, the calm before the storm, Irie and Tomitake reflect upon how they feel they've failed Takano in their own ways, through poor communication, misjudgment, and projection of their own ideas as to who she is and what she needs. Adult relationships are often painfully, unknowingly performative. Meanwhile, our protagonists simply haven't lived in this world long enough to have become worn down by its crushing apathy. You cannot understand the true events of Onikakushi, nor how upsetting they are until you later get a glimpse into the story from all angles. A world where three people are reaching out to one another in spite of all their worries, fears, and lack of belief. It is no coincidence that Higurashi's narrative is punctuated throughout by crushing hugs, tender touches, and, above all, joined hands. These acts of what the Japanese call skinship are exponentially rarer there than in the West. This is what sets the children apart from the adults in Higurashi. The love they feel, overflowing, overwhelming, aching love that they haven't yet learnt how to suppress. Love that they curse and then learn is their greatest strength. Higurashi is all about radical empathy. While Hanyu seeks to end the cycle of suffering by taking humanity's sins upon herself, Rika goes one step further, by believing in a miracle that relies not on self-sacrifice. Spoiler alert, Higurashi was never about winning, but about nobody losing. If you go back to the connecting fragments segment after you've finished the game, and read them all in the correct order, you uncover a hidden 50-second fragment, a world where Miyoko's parents never died. The story ends with her adding the 20th and final flag to the collection she's been building. The flag is, to her, a symbol of good luck, a token to bring happiness, or perhaps to ward off misfortune. She sits there and realizes nothing has changed. But maybe the happiness won't be immediate. Maybe it will come tomorrow or the next day. Like this, she never realizes she is living in the world another version of herself mourned for an eternity. This really hit me. Back when I was a kid, when I was so fixated on whatever was wrong with my life at any given time, I never realized how much I had to hold dear. It's true that things were hard, and that I suffered a lack of connection due to circumstances beyond my control. But were they really? Back then, I waited and waited for someone to reach out to me. I never considered doing it myself. The funniest thing is, as the years pass, the bitterness fades. I treasure the memories of warm days, few and far between as they were. I learn from my mistakes and make sure there will be more of those in the future. It is important that Higurashi's ending isn't perfect. Satoshi is still missing, Rika and Satoko's parents are dead, Rena likewise has no mother, Keiichi will have to live with the weight of his past, Shion's fingernails will never properly heal, Mion carries the demon on her back, and Hanyu the sins of a generation. It's funny then, how perfect the ending seems. This is because we have learnt by this point that happiness is built on suffering, and that there is no one without the other. Higurashi instead reminds us that bad times will certainly come. When they do, we will mourn for the days we never appreciated. And in the depths of our suffering, we will need the courage to hope yet again. Sometimes that happiness will be unrecoverable, but something new will surely be waiting. Most of all, it is only when we add our coins to the pile that we see, all around us, other people are doing the same thing, betting on their hopes and dreams throughout the cycle of happiness and despair. How much more wonderful does the world look then? I loved the Higurashi anime deeply and for many years. Perhaps it isn't a coincidence that it took me being at the lowest point in my life to finally pick up the source material. Through the months that I read it, I realised I was not rediscovering an old favourite, but experiencing a masterpiece for the very first time. I finished reading Higurashi in my aunt's empty flat, a few streets away from the school where I had raved about it to my friends 10 years earlier, and I cried my way through half a roll of toilet paper. Days or weeks later, I boarded a plane back to the place I had moved some years earlier with my family, a remote village in the French countryside. After various trials and tribulations, my family had decided to make a fresh start. I was a city kid, and I struggled with the change in pace necessitated by small-town living, even more than the cultural differences or language barrier. As it had all those years earlier, Hinamizawa had become a home away from not really home, the club a second family. In one of my last weeks in France before I moved back to the UK to start university, on one of the sweltering evenings that bookended yet another nebulous chapter in my life, I opened a Google document and started to write an essay. I didn't know what I'd do with it. I certainly never considered making it into a video. I just needed to understand just what this series had stirred in me. I still think about friendship a lot. After 3 years at university, I think I finally understand it a bit better, as I write these words from the house I've shared for 2 years with 4 girls I consider my family, with whom I've fought bitterly and sobbed into the shoulders of. No longer do I allow my life to be defined by the silences wherein you hover on a thought, wondering whether it's too personal to share. Best of all, they allow me to paste pictures of me on every available surface of our home. Higurashi didn't teach me how to completely open up. I still struggle with it, but it taught me that I was struggling. As I spoke about in my Mion essay, it taught me deeper empathy and forgiveness, for others and for myself. At a time when I was so lonely, it gave me characters so brilliantly realised I no longer felt that way. And then, when I was ready, it inspired me to reconnect with the world around me, perhaps to connect with it for the very first time. In the Atonement arc, Keiichi confesses his sins to his friends because he feels it is his obligation to do so. They tell him 2 important things. The first is that their love is not proportional to how much of his past they know. In friendship, you don't wait for evidence that you can trust someone. You take the leap. Secondly, they tell him they cannot absolve him. Their job is simply to share the weight. This is something I'm learning to let people do. I graduate in a few weeks. As I look at the boxes filling my bedroom, I can't help but wonder how time has passed so quickly. I remember the delivery van arriving with my things like it was yesterday, as I wandered through the empty rooms of this house and wondered what the coming years would be like. They were happy. Incredibly, incredibly happy. That's what Higurashi tries to tell us. To notice the happiness, to treasure it before it's too late. The thing is, I did. And that's exactly why it hurts. For 3 years I've read and reread this story almost feverishly, and for 3 years I've returned and returned to this piece of writing in hopes of explaining some small part of what Higurashi is to me. And if anything, I can finally say the brilliance of the friendship Higurashi showed me as a child who was so very alone. The friendship I chased for so many years afterwards does exist, and with it, all the pain and strife this story portrays so unflinchingly, because it isn't one or the other. These years were full of hardship, as they always have been and always will be, and yet, for the first time, I have no regrets, because I had the courage to reach out. Because of that, I realised it's not the suffering you remember, but how you fought against it, and who you fought it with. Ryukishi once said he didn't think he'd ever be able to write anything like Higurashi again. This is true. As a writer myself, I think we're inclined to centre our very first stories of this scale around what lies at the core of our being. They are the very essence of who we are and what we believe. In the 100 hours we spend with this cast, we feel the weight of their struggle. We walk far more than a mile in their shoes. And we simultaneously spend all this time with Ryukishi too. Ryukishi, who wrote this story for an almost non-existent audience. Higurashi is itself an exercise in vulnerability. Just as the characters learn to open up to one another, Ryukishi takes this time to open up to us, and in doing so, crafts the rawest reading experience I've ever had. It would have taken nothing less to make what is now and forever my favourite story, one that has continued changing me for 10 years. Each time I returned to Hinamizawa, I lamented over the fact that it would never be quite the same as that first run-through, and yet each time I found something new, a new character to see myself in, a new lesson to learn. a new experience I could now relate to. By the way, my degree is in psychology. In a few months, once again, I'll move to a place where I know nobody in pursuit of the work I've decided to dedicate my life to. As a child, I came to be awed by Higurashi's portrayal of mental illness, a subject I probably wouldn't have even been able to put a name to at the time, despite having seen it all around me in my home and in the mirror since birth. But that's a topic for another video. Specifically, my next step is a master's degree in forensic psychology, a field that seeks, if nothing else, to understand the things people do to one another when they are at their most broken. It's a field that believes in radical empathy and relies on seeing every person on this earth as being as human and deserving of help as the next. Now that this essay has drawn to an end, I want to leave you with a final passage taken from Himatsubushi. You've probably heard the phrase, a fire on the opposite shore, sometime in your life, no? For example, if your neighbour's house was on fire, you'd probably try and help to put it out, wouldn't you? It'd be awful if the fire spread and burned down your own house after all. But what if that fire was in a town on the opposite side of a river? Would you still go out of your way to help? You wouldn't, would you? Even though it would be the wrong thing to do, there's no way the fire could spread to your own house. Even if it turned into a huge conflagration, there's no relation between the houses that will spread fire to yours and those that won't. With this basic example, you should be able to see the difference between gears that are or aren't related to your own. Having said that, there's still a lot to think about, even without a river to divide it. After all, it's not a spatial problem like being on the other side of the river, is it?